Now, global or all-world ETFs such as Vanguard's VWRL are popular amongst many investors. These funds do a lot of the hard work for you, giving you exposure from companies all over the globe at the click of a button. This popular Vanguard fund is a great option, but it's not quite perfect, and I think I can do a better job. In this video, I'm going to cover how I've built my own global fund, which I believe is better in pretty much every way. Make sure you stick around for the whole video because I'll be pitching VWRL against my fund in a head-to-head. Okay, so first let's start with my two main problems that I have with these all-encompassing global funds. Firstly, the high fees. VWRL has an ongoing charge of 0.22%, and that eats into the long-term returns. Now, you may think that that's such a small percentage, however stacked up over time this can literally cost you tens of thousands of pounds. I'll go into more depth on this later in the video. Now, my second issue with these all-encompassing funds is the lack of control and levers. With a global ETF like VWRL, you're locked into its weightings. You don't have the ability to shift money into specific regions when opportunities arise. To give you an example of this, say the US market dips slightly. You might think, great, this is an opportunity to capitalise on that discount and buy some funds at a cheaper cost. However, if your US exposure is locked in within a global fund, you can't pick out that piece of the pie. Instead, you've got to invest in a little piece of everything, which might not be the best approach. This is what I mean by a lack of levers. You don't have the levers to pull and invest on different markets and different sectors should you wish. Now, with those two main issues at the top of our mind, let's see how building a global fund can overcome these challenges. Now, to get started, I'll be using VWRL's regional split as a benchmark. The goal here is to match the broad exposure it offers whilst giving myself the flexibility to adjust allocations and minimise costs. This is the main region split that we'll need to mirror when building our global fund. So to get started, let's start with that biggest portion, the US. Now, for the US, we need a US focused ETF or an S&P focused ETF. For this, I've gone with the SPDR S&P 500 ETF with the ticker symbol SPX5. This provides us with exposure to the top 500 companies within the US. You can expect to find many well-known companies in there such as Apple, Microsoft, Amazon and Google. It's then no surprise to see that the technology split within this ETF shows a heavy weighting towards the technology sector. This ETF has experienced really impressive growth, returning over 120% over the past 5 years. It also has a small dividend at 1.15%. Now, it's worth mentioning at this point that any ETF that generally tracks the S&P 500 is going to have a similar split within its weightings. So this was just a case of finding one with the lowest fee. The best part of this fund is that the fee is just 0.03%, which I was really impressed by, and this has got to be one of the cheapest ETFs on the market today. We'll be using this ETF to cover our US exposure, making up 66% of the fund, reflecting that of our VWRL fund. Next up, we need to cover Europe, which makes up 14.8% of VWRL. Now, if we delve into the makeup of VWRL a little more, we can actually see that 3.6% of this is taken up by the UK on its own, with the rest of Europe making up 11.8% of this ETF. So let's start with that UK part. Ideally, we need an ETF which covers the top companies within the UK market. For this, I've gone with the HSBC FTSE 100 ETF with the ticker symbol HUKX. This ETF seeks to track the FTSE 100 index, meaning it contains the 100 largest UK stocks. You'll likely know many of the companies such as oil giants Shell and BP, and also companies such as AstraZeneca and Unilever. This ETF has experienced strong and stable growth over the past 5 years, generating a total return of 87%. This is propped up by the impressive dividend yield of 3.48%, which I'm sure will appeal to those looking for passive income from their investments. This ETF also has quite an impressive low fee at 0.07%, making it an ideal addition to our global fund. Now, to cover the rest of Europe, I came across a really low-cost ETF which covers all of Europe excluding the UK, which is ideal given that we've already got our HSBC ETF in place. This ETF is the Vanguard FTSE Developed Europe excluding UK ETF with the ticker symbol VERX. This ETF covers 431 companies from across developed markets in Europe excluding the UK, of course. It's a real mixed bag in this ETF, with the top country exposure being within Switzerland, France, Germany and the Netherlands. What I really like about this ETF is the sector split. The sector exposure is much more evenly split when compared to many other ETFs. This helps reduce risk and typically increases stability. The returns of this ETF have also been strong, holding at just over 85% over the past 5 years, which means around 17% increase per year. This too is helped along by its healthy dividend at 2.73%. Again, another tick in the box for those investors looking for passive income. This ETF has a relatively low fee at 0.1%, again making it a good addition to our DIY global fund. So taking these first 3 ETFs, we have the US covered with SPX 5, and Europe covered by a mix of HUKX and VERX. So next up, we need to cover the emerging markets. Now to keep things super simple here, I went with another Vanguard fund. For this, I chose the Vanguard FTSE Emerging Markets ETF with the ticker symbol VFEM. You can see this ETF is quite vast, covering over 2,000 companies from emerging markets. Within this ETF, you'll see dominant exposure to China, India and Taiwan, with smaller exposure to some of the lesser known emerging markets. Now if you're like me, you may only recognise a few of the top 10 holdings within this ETF, such as Taiwan Semiconductor and also marketplace giant Alibaba. The top sectors within this ETF are held within the financial and technology sectors. And when it comes to performance, it's not as strong as some of the other ETFs and markets that we've covered, but that's simply because they are still on the rise, hence the name emerging markets. Again, this ETF also pays a reasonable dividend of 2.59%, so another tick in the box for those keen on dividend investing. The only slight drawback to this ETF is the ongoing fee at 0.22%. However, since this makes up such a small portion within this DIY fund, this shouldn't affect things too much. So moving back onto our list, with the emerging markets taken care of, now it's time for us to look at the Pacific. Now of that 9.6% exposure, a large portion at 5.6% is taken up by Japan, so we need to look at an ETF which covers this market. Now specifically for Japan, I went with the Amundi Prime Japan ETF with the ticker symbol PRIJ. This ETF covers over 300 large and mid-cap companies within Japan, and straight off the bat it boasts of a low fee of 0.5%, making it a great choice. You'll recognise many of the top holdings within this ETF, including Toyota, Mitsubishi and Sony, just to name a few. Performance of this ETF has been respectable at 44% over the past 5 years, averaging around 8 or 9% per year. This ETF also pays out a dividend of just under 2%. So that's Japan covered, but now we need to find an ETF which covers the rest of the Pacific region. For this, I've gone with the Vanguard FTSE Developed Asia Pacific excluding Japan ETF, with the ticker symbol VAPX. This ETF tracks almost 400 large and mid-cap stocks from developed countries in the Asia-Pacific region, and of course excluding Japan. Australian companies take up a large portion of this ETF, with South Korea and Hong Kong taking the second and third spot. You'll see a key blend here of both technology and banking stocks, with other sectors fairly evenly split. Recent performance hasn't been amazing, however if you look over a longer span of time, the returns haven't been too bad. Despite this slightly disappointing past performance, it's important to remember that historic results don't dictate how these markets could perform in the future. Exposure to these countries still make up an important part in ensuring that we get global exposure within this DIY fund. One standout feature of this ETF though is its high dividend at 3.78%. These dividends help provide some stability and income during economic downturns, so they're really important in my opinion. This ETF has an expense ratio of 0.15%, again which isn't the lowest out of the bunch, however it makes up such a small percentage in our overall global fund, it's nothing to worry about. Okay, so now let's take a look at our full set. All of our ETFs are in place, and the eagle-eyed viewers may remember that VWRL had 0.2% of its holdings within the Middle East. However, I've chosen to not include this as it makes up such a tiny amount of the overall fund, it's barely noticeable. So all of these funds look good, and there's a lot of figures here, so let me make this a lot simpler by providing the top line stats. Now according to InvestEngine, VWRL holds 2,634 companies within it, whereas our DIY fund holds 2,939 companies, so it's a tick in the box for our fund offering more diversification. Now the regional and sector splits are almost identical, as we've essentially mirrored that of VWRL. Moving on to the dividend yield, VWRL currently sits at 1.56%. However, this DIY fund sits at ever so slightly higher at 1.61%. It's ever so marginal, but it's still a win for our DIY fund. Now, one of the main reasons for doing this exercise was of course the fees. The fees of VWRL, to recap, are 0.22%. However, the combined fees of my DIY fund are 0.06%, which is a huge difference. To put that into perspective, if you'd invested £500 per month into both of these funds for 30 years, assuming a 10% average annual return, by the end of the 30 years, your investment in VWRL would have built up to £954,979. However, our DIY fund with the lower fees will have grown to £984,405. That's a difference of almost £30,000 that you would have been out of pocket purely down to the higher fees taking a cut of your market gains over the long term. This really highlights the point that even though these percentages might seem really small at the start, they can also snowball similar to that of your investments and cost you a lot in the long run. Our final point concludes that VWRL is still a fixed ETF. Whereas our DIY fund, we have a lot more control and flexibility about its weightings and exposure to different countries and regions. So from my point of view, that's another tick in the box for our DIY fund. Now it's key to note here that there's no right answer with either of these funds, they both have their merits. VWRL is a great one-size-fits-all fund, and it's great for people who want to pick one fund, keep things super simple and set and forget their investments. However, this DIY fund is for those that want a little bit more control and a little bit more input on their investing. It's worth mentioning at this point that there's not really a right or wrong answer. Either of these solutions are much better than not investing at all. Now of course, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but going off historical performance, I'd expect either of these funds to average a return of around 10% per year. Now if you'd like to take a look at this DIY fund, I've gone ahead and done the hard work for you. I've built this on the InvestEngine platform, which you can copy and use to invest. I've called it the Elevate All-World Fund, and if you're using InvestEngine, you can click the link in the description of this video and it'll let you copy this. I know a lot of other investors use Trading 212, and I've checked that all of the ETFs that I've included in this video are also available on that platform, so if you want to replicate it on there, you can do. Now this DIY fund is going to form the core of my investment strategy for the next 2 years. I'll be investing month after month within this DIY fund, so it'll be interesting to see the progress. In my next video, I'll be going through my new investment strategy for the next 2 years. In this video, I plan to cover how I'll be structuring my investing, how often I'll be investing, but also the returns I expect over the next 2 years. If you're interested in keeping up to date with this, make sure you subscribe. If you've got any questions about anything I've covered within this video, please do let me know in the comments and I'll reply to as many as I can. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.